Hi, this is Bill Murray. This is my Prezi on Unpacking standards. So first of all, let's take a look at the two standards that I'm using. The source of the standards is the District of Columbia Social Studies Pre-K through Grade 12 standards. And I've chosen two standards from the economics course, Principles of Economics, which is an elective course. The first standard here, standard E1, is students understand common economic terms and concepts and economic reasoning. And this pretty much forms the basis of the econ course. It's all the basic terms that you're going to be using and building on throughout the course. So the reason that I chose these two standards is that it's the absolute foundation of the course. And if you get this part of the course wrong, you're going to be in trouble going forward. So it's really important to get this right. So that's the first one. Students understand common economic terms and concepts and economic reasoning. And then if we come out and take a look at the second standard, that is students analyze the aggregate economic behavior of the US economy. And again, this is where you're moving into the sort of macro area, and you're looking at how all the sort of cogs and gears of the US economy mesh together to make the whole thing work. So again, that's kind of vital. If you're not getting this part of the course right, it's really going to go downwards from there. So that's why I've chosen these two standards. Okay, let's come out and take a look at the big ideas. If we go in, first of all, and have a look at Standard 1. Standard 1 is students understand common economic terms, concepts, and economic reasoning. The terms and concepts part of that is reasonably straightforward. This is where they're looking at some of the really important vocabulary. And if you look at sub-skill 1, 2, 3, you can see scarcity, need for choices, opportunity cost, marginal benefit, marginal cost, those kinds of things. So that's the very basic economic vocabulary that they need, and the concepts as well. But the key point here in E1 is it's the economic reasoning. And I think that's the big idea that you're going to have to get across to the students, is that how people think about economics on a day-to-day basis. And again, this is really vital. If you can get this part of the course right, everything should go smoothly after that. I think for my students, teaching economics, once they kind of understand what economics is, once they get that big idea, then everything starts to fall into place a little bit, because they tend to think that econ is just all about money and interest rates and things like that. But if you can get across to them the idea that economics is all about limited resources and unlimited wants, and anytime you're making a decision where you're allocating scarce resources, that's an economic decision. So for them, whenever they're sitting down at night and deciding how much, what they're going to study and how many hours they're going to spend studying it, should they do an extra hour of math homework, or should they hit the hay and get to bed? That's an economic decision. And if they're deciding when they're older whether to buy a car or whether to take a holiday, again, that's a kind of an econ decision. So if you can sort of get that big idea across to them, then that's really important. Okay, also let's move on and look at the sub-skills. If we zoom in then to the sub-skills 1, 2, 3. First one is explain the causal relationship between scarcity and the need for choices. And this is where you're going to have to get across to them, like we were saying, whenever anytime they need to think about making a choice about how to allocate their time or their money. That's when you're getting into scarcity and the need to make choices. Next, then in 2, you've got explain opportunity cost, marginal benefit, and the marginal cost as well. And this is where, need for choices. Once you can get that idea across to them, the next thing you need to get across is how do people actually go about making these decisions? Because you can't just make decisions randomly. You're going to have some kind of a system for making them. And that's where marginal benefit and marginal cost come in. And again, this is where it's the kind of fundamental, it's the basis of the whole course. If you don't understand marginal benefit, marginal cost, you'll be in trouble. So you would want to explain to them, perhaps as an example, if they were sitting doing their homework, and it's 10 o'clock at night, they could think about, should I do one more hour of homework, or should I get to bed and sleep? And if they think that the marginal benefit of doing one more hour of homework outweighs the marginal cost of being a bit more tired the next morning, then they should go ahead and do that, but vice versa. If they feel like the cost of staying awake for another hour is going to be more than the benefit, then that's where they should get to bed. So that's kind of the big idea there. They have to understand that every decision is based on marginal benefit, marginal cost. Next is identify the difference between monetary and non-monetary incentives and how changes in incentives cause changes in behavior. So that's a very important. The idea there, you can extrapolate this to any kind of situation in society. Whenever they go and get jobs, their employers could offer them bonuses, could offer them stock options. Those are all monetary incentives. And then non-monetary, of course, is where they could be offered extra holidays, days off, other kind of benefits like that. So again, I suppose it's an easy idea when you think about it that if you offer people incentives, then they change their behavior. But the students really need to know that permeates every aspect of life. So that's where that comes down to, changes in behavior based on incentives. Okay, let's come out and we shall take a look at the second standard. This time you've got students analyze the aggregate economic behavior of the US economy. So again, like I said before, this is all the sort of cogs and gears meshing together. And that's sort of the big idea here is that the US economy is a big old beast, and there's a sort of a domino effect. If you change interest rates, for example, that's going to have a big effect on how much money people put into savings accounts in the banks, and how much money is borrowed by companies, and that'll have an effect on investment, and then that has a knock-on effect on the real GDP of the economy and growth rates. So every time you make one change in the economy, then there's several knock-on effects. So that's really the big idea that you're trying to get across here. So you're doing that. You're looking at nominal and real data, nominal real GDP, for example. Then you're looking at employment rates, number of new jobs created, inflation, deflation, economic growth, and then short-term, long-term interest rates and their relative significance. So I'm not going to go into each and every one of those, but again, the big idea here is all about knock-on effects and understanding that there's going to be several steps to take whenever you're reasoning for those. So that's kind of the major idea. Okay, let's go on and take a look at the skills that the students are going to need. So if we go back let's come out of big ideas, go into skills, back into standard 1. This time we're looking at students understand common economic terms. I mean, understand that the dictionary definition is to perceive the intended meaning of something. But I mean, it's a little bit vague. Understand, it's a little bit difficult to quantify exactly how you measure that. So I think if we look at the sub-skills, it's a little bit easier to see. So 1, they have to explain the causal relationship between scarcity and the need for choices. 2 is explain opportunity cost. 3 is identify the difference between monetary and non-monetary incentives. So I think explain is a little bit easier. This time it means that you're able to clearly define these terms to another person. So I think that helps you focus on your teaching strategies. So, for example, with the first one here, the scarcity and the need for choices, a teaching strategy, something that I do with them early on in the course then is I do an activity using the example of kidney dialysis at a hospital where there are lots of patients waiting or who need kidney dialysis, and they're different ages, and some of them have children, some of them don't, some of them are children themselves, some of them might be able to get a transplant in the future, and then of course you have a limited number of hours that the kidney dialysis machines can be used for. And then we work through that together, and the students have to decide who gets access to the kidney dialysis machines. And I think that helps them then get a real handle on scarcity and the need for choices. And then once they understand that concept, then they're going to be able to explain it to another person or another student. For opportunity cost, then, a teaching strategy that I do with that is I talk about the true cost of university, and we look at, because the students, if you ask them how much does it cost to go to university, they can come up with things like, your tuition fees are $15,000 a year, then your books cost this much, and then your food costs this much, and accommodation. So that's where you go through it together and you talk about, well, even if you weren't at university, you would still be paying for food and accommodation, so that's not really part of it, which gets them thinking, okay, well, that's interesting. But then the key point, of course, is that if you're spending 4 years at university, you're not earning, and that's the real opportunity cost. So that gets across the message that opportunity cost is what you have to give up if you want to get something else. And again, that's going to help them to be able to explain that to another person. Last one, that one then is identify the difference between monetary and non-monetary. And with identify, it could be as simple as giving them a list of incentives and having them label them monetary or non-monetary. And then they could go on to identify possible changes in behavior that could result from that. Okay, let's come out and we'll take a look at the second standard and have a look at the skills for that. So this time with the second standard, they have to analyze the aggregate economic behavior of the US. This time, analyze is a bit more concrete than just understand. So the definition is examine methodically and in detail the constitution or structure of something. So this suggests that you're going to be looking at things more in depth. It's rather than simply understanding, you need to drill down deeper into it and explore something more fully, which isn't really surprising given that this is the macro economy, which is pretty complex, and you're going to have to be able to look at it in more detail. So analyzing then, you're going to be able, with the sub-skills, you're going to have to identify differences between nominal and real data, describe the significance of unemployment rate, and also outline the differences between short-term and long-term interest rates. So for the first one, if we take a look at identify differences between nominal and real data, usually a teaching strategy I would use here would be to just give them an example of a very simple economy, where, for example, maybe they just produce hamburgers and hot dogs, and the prices change. You know, you've got maybe 2015 prices, 2016 prices, 2017, so they're changing. And then we would work through that together and look at what's the real GDP. First of all, what's the nominal GDP, just the prices multiplied by the quantities. And then look at keeping the prices the same, having maybe 2015 as the base year, and then multiplying all the other quantities in the other years then by the base year prices. And then they can start to see how the changes in prices will kind of mask whether the economy is actually growing or not, whether we're producing more stuff. So that really helps them to identify the differences between those two. Next one then is describe the significance of the unemployment rate. I mean, again, if they're describing, this is going to be something similar to the E1 standard that we looked at before. E1 used a lot of they had to explain, so describe is something similar. So here they're describing the significance of the unemployment rate. So I think what you could do here is a teaching strategy might be to kind of flip the classroom, give them have them for homework, watch the videos that they need to watch, maybe using Khan Academy or using your own videos, and then get them to come in and have 2 or 3 students teach the lesson to the rest of the class, or they're making presentations. So that'll help them with that skill of describing. And then the last one is outline the differences between short-term and long-term interest rates and the relative significance. So this time with outline, it's suggesting that it's going to be more perhaps prepping for an essay. So teaching strategies here, you might need to be reviewing essay writing skills, giving essay prompts for this topic, and then the students can start to draw up outlines. You could have them maybe working in pairs and drawing up outlines to prompts on short-term, long-term interest rates that you've given them and their significance. Okay, let's come out and we'll take a look at some activities that you could use. For example, one of the sub-skills was explain the causal relationship between scarcity and the need for choices. So this is where you're kind of engaging the students. You need to know that they're learning and developing the skills. So these activities need to be something that you're kind of assessing the progress that they've made. So for that sub-skill, explain the causal relationship between scarcity and the need for choices. This is where you could have peer mentoring. So after you've gone through the concepts and the ideas together, then you could have some of your students peer mentor other students, maybe stronger students with weaker students, if you think some of the students are struggling slightly. Another thing that they could do that shows that they're able to explain this is they could give a presentation to the rest of the class. Maybe they could design a poster. They could also design a classroom experiment to like, for example, I was talking about the kidney dialysis activity. So you could ask the students to come up with their own activity, something along the same lines. And if they can do that, then that shows that they're able to explain this concept to other people. because you're not going to be able to design an experiment without being able to explain it. Another thing that they could do then is write, sort of a simple activity would be to write